わかったんだ。巨人を滅ぼすことができるのは悪魔だ。悪魔を蘇らせる、それが俺の使命だったんだ。それがおめおめと生き残っちまった俺の意味なんだよ。
Now, despite the extremely provocative title of this video, I am not here to endorse the Jaegerist or any group in Attack on Titan for that matter. Putting my own personal beliefs to the side, for the most part, this video is going to take an objective look at Floch and how he seemingly rose from a nobody side character to the leader of one of the most successful and violent revolutions in Attack on Titan history. Unfortunately, the controversy that surrounds this particular topic, and especially the character of Floch himself, tends to get a little heated and rough. But in my opinion, this is due to people taking an emotional response to something that they see as black and white without fully understanding the extent of the issues at the core. Anyways, throughout Attack on Titan, we see quite a few characters who shoulder a heavy burden and seem to do unspeakable things to achieve their own goals. These are people who, due to the Attack on Titan's world's sad state of affairs, are forced to do evil things that they otherwise would not do. This is in order to obtain something that they want. Regardless of whether said goals are selfless or selfish, they see their dreams and realize that they cannot attain it without violent and sometimes downright evil methods. However, most of these characters do it anyways, but the point is that there is always that sense of initial hesitance or sadness associated with their task. They don't want to do it, but they have to. However, there is one character who has emerged from the background to go against the grain in this regard, and become the willing, exact type of asshole that this story needs to pull off its desired multidimensionality. Floch Forster distinguishes himself in that he is the only major character who fully embraces this role and loves it. He has no qualms about doing what needs to be done. Given this fact about his nature, it makes total sense why he's so widely disliked by the audience. Floch is an absolute menace. But how did he get here? Floch was introduced to the series in an almost inconsequential manner, a simple background character who switched to the Survey Corps in light of the uprising and subsequent propaganda campaigns that were pushed onto the public at the end of the uprising arc. However, all of that idealism that he bought into was swiftly crushed after bearing witness to the harsh reality and watching all of his comrades and friends die. And underneath all of his tears and cowering, it is here where things first begin to change for Floch. However, I'm getting ahead of myself. His first real introduction to the story was in Return to Shishigana. His first major scene, however, was when he was opposing the main cast for their action in saving Armin over Erwin. He hated Erwin for putting everyone through that and leading them to their death. But at the same time, he realized that someone like Erwin was needed to survive and carve open the path to freedom. And after seeing Erwin's willingness to do whatever he could to push forward, Floch came to deeply value the concept of a devil like this to lead them and save them from the hell of the world. Floch, a self-professed coward, had a simple motivation. He doesn't want his life to be pointless. And after seeing all of that bloodshed, Floch realizes the type of mark that he wants to leave on the world. He wants to contribute to a massive worldwide change. He wants to rescue Eldia. He wants to be influential, and he wants to be powerful. To Floch, Erwin brought meaning to what would have otherwise been completely meaningless deaths. And coming back to the disagreement that he had with the main cast for choosing to save Armin, after this mission, Floch quickly grew to despise any of those outside the walls who would contribute to enforcing this hell upon them, which is pretty understandable if you ask me. Who's to say that saving Armin was the optimal decision? Who can really argue against the merits of a demonic figurehead to spearhead Eldia? Who can blame him for not wanting to put faith in the open-mindedness of nations that have subjugated them for so long? Now, you must understand that the Survey Corps has always been the place that wild idealists, vagabonds, and revenge seekers were drawn to. Their high casualty rate had them at the derision of the public. However, that changes after the successful uprising and the introduction of people like Floch into the Survey Corps. Now, the public loves them, and normal, run-of-the-mill men flood to join, which, for the most part, made up the core of the Jaegerist movement. Back to Floch, however, he harbors guilt, and he observed that a self-proclaimed coward like him, in contrast to the determined Marlowe, for instance, was able to survive the carnage of Shishigana, while everyone else died brutal deaths. The fact is that he did indeed survive for some reason, and this filled him with the desire to carry out some sort of purpose with the time that he had been granted, and not to live a meaningless life, which meant he had to achieve victory no matter what. This was the motto of the Survey Corps, exemplified by Erwin in the rallying cry of their cause: dedicate your heart. To take that vow meant that you were willing to sacrifice your life for humanity, and within the context of pre-basement paradise, it was an unquestionable virtue. This popularity exists outside of the military as well, and shows itself in the citizens of the new Eldian Empire. From the very start, the public shows its displeasure with the government's imprisonment of Eren. Even once the rumbling begins, the citizens pay little mind to the unintended destruction of cities, still viewing it as a great sacrifice to preserve the greater peace and prosperity for Eldia. Eren's plans provided him with everything that he desired, so it's no wonder that he dedicates everything to the plan. However, this shows another concept and major factor of Floch's character: honesty. After his experience, Floch becomes very straightforward, and to put it plainly, spits it as he sees it.
どうだ？誰を弔う？これから補充する調査兵団には本当のことを言えよ。俺みてえな腰抜けが間違って入ってこねえようにな。エルヴィン団長なしでこれからどうするつもりなんだよ。そりゃ俺みてえな雑魚使い捨てるぐらいしか使い道もねえだろうが、そんな雑魚にだってな、寝踏みする権利くらいはあるだろう。
Hitch that Marlowe and the rest of the fallen scouts who died probably regretted having to die like that, and most of them probably also wished they had never volunteered in the first place. He also says that Levi and Eren were too emotional in their decision to save Armin, and he does all of this at a funeral for said fallen scouts, which many would view as disrespectful, but to Floch, the sentiment of their funeral itself is what's disrespectful because of how it romanticizes all of the deaths as heroic, when in the end, none of them wanted to be there. Even post-timeskip, when he leaks the news of Eren's imprisonment, mostly for the Jaegerist's own needs, of course, but also, in my opinion, because he believed that the people deserved to know the truth of what was happening behind the scenes. And he believes that they have the right to choose what to do after knowing the full picture, something that he was never granted when he bought into the propagandized Shishigana mission. And again, from the very start, the public shows its displeasure with the government's imprisonment of Eren. Now, characters like Hanji are faced with the political reality, and the old idealism of the Survey Corps has become outdated. From Erwin's last cry to humanity within the walls, a moment where he surrendered his own personal goal, he spawned the Devil's Advocate, Floch. Now that the truth of the world has been revealed and sunk in, the situation has changed. But the context for many is by and large the same. Humanity inside the walls is threatened by an outside enemy, and now that enemy is incomparably larger and greater than even the Titans. Even in the past, this is best exemplified by, of course, Erwin, where mass sacrifices were required for even the smallest gains and victories over the Titans. Erwin, the one man Floch admired and would follow into a suicide charge, is the one most affected by his last speech. All of these aspects to Floch's character that I've noted are understandable, and all of it is well within his rights. Not everyone is capable or willing to see the other perspectives when they've experienced the amount of pain and anguish that someone like Floch has. And while his honesty and pragmatism has led to the barbaric extremes that he showcases throughout the later half of the story, such as him seeing the innocent Liberio citizens as enemies no matter what, this is also understandable and justifiable to an extent, in my opinion. It's definitely dark, and he may have grown to ignore and dismiss the suffering that he and the Jaegerists cause on the route to their end goal, but again, it's understandable if you take into account the hell that he's been through and the people that he's cared about that had been torn to shreds by rocks or eaten by man-eating titans. Floch and the Jaegerists focus deeply on the death of their comrades and the possible future death of their friends and families. Floch has come far as a character from that suicide charge all of those years ago, but his primary motivation hasn't changed. Him and the rest of the Jaegerists are motivated simply by fear. The fear of dying. The fear of dying a pointless death for no other reason other than that they were born into the world. What we see is not simply a congregation of Eldian nationalists, but something closer to riotous peasants, and accordingly their beliefs are shared by the vast majority of Paradis citizens. Now, of course, I feel bad for the mass amounts of deaths that Paradis causes in the Librio invasion, but I don't think Floch's an evil person. And although I said at the start that I keep my personal bias out of it, I approve of his cutthroat, cold, and ruthless attitude. But, moving on, however, this is where Floch goes from a radicalist to a genuine menace to society, and I'm honestly totally here for it. Now, as time goes on, and characters such as Hanji and Armin could never provide an answer to protect the island, and they could never properly rebuke Floch from at the military funeral either, this is where Floch's interaction with Shadis becomes relevant, because it's here where he starts showing his borderline sadism and extreme condescension towards anyone who is not aligned with the Jaegerist movement. He uses Keith as a symbolic personification of stomping out the old idealism, as I mentioned earlier, by beating the living shit out of him, without any hint of remorse. But he couldn't do this alone. Floch is only able to have the power he does through the prerogative nature of the crowd, enabled by latching onto the ideal hero that he believed in. And that hero just happened to be Eren Yeager. The experience of war completely changed Floch into the dark person with a totally new, and depending on how you see it, dangerous perspective. But again, is this really his fault? He wasn't a bad guy when we first met him. He was a bit of a coward, a bit pompous and presumptuous, but overall he was just a regular kid, indistinguishable from the devil and stone-cold killer he turned into. Floch is a regular person driven to do terrible things, and he is without doubt turned into an awful person, but one who's understandable. For us, Floch is a representation of ordinary people. Anyone with enough trauma can be driven to do the same thing as Floch did. There are, of course, some who try to see both sides of every conflict and keep an open mind. People who prefer talking things out than cold-blooded murder. People like Falco, Armin, Jean, etc. But Floch has no patience for that. His one-minded pragmatism and adherence to what he personally believes is right is such a huge factor in our world today. Even though he's dedicated as evil and psychotic, his presence is important for showcasing those that had the empathy that he lacks. Lacks for good reason, but lacks nevertheless. War changes people, some for the better, but most for the worst. Some people cannot find it within themselves to be sympathetic, willing to see all sides and be able to give the benefit of the doubt to one's enemy. That is Floch, the face of the common man and woman. Floch is the type of person that a conflict like this will bring about, and this is shown in our own history books. It's easy to dismiss Floch as an evil fascist, a crazy nationalist who full-heartedly supports genocide, which, if that was actually the case, his role in this story would be very different, and it would be significantly changed in how he's represented throughout. He's a representation of the perspective of the everyman, and how they can be influenced by different factors, and how, in response to conflict and wanting one's voice to be heard, and life to have a meaning, one can be radicalized and extreme through warfare, desensitized to the tragedy and unwilling to see other perspectives. It's no wonder that someone like him came about as a result of this war. And despite his cruelty, the core of his character is so very human and flawed. And while Floch can be accused of many things, there is one thing that even he got wrong. He is not a coward. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time.